What is up, guys? Welcome back to Keep It Hoop. If you're watching this on YouTube, welcome. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, welcome. So I wanted to do one of these weekly, sometimes bi-weekly recaps of some of the games we've seen recently. Just talk about what's going on around the league. But before we get started, I wanted to talk about some of the videos I did earlier this week. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out. Monday, I did a video on LeBron James's free throw routine and kind of some of the things he could fix. I know it's something he's worked on, but his free throw percentages over the last few years have kind of been inconsistent. I think he started his career at around 75, 78%, and he's dipped down to high 60s, low 70s over the last few years. So go check that video out. Again, just talking about his free throw form. Then broke down Jalen Green's fourth game in the G League and the video I posted yesterday. And look, I was really impressed. He showed some really good things on defense, did some really nice things just attacking the rim, showing off his athleticism, got to the free throw line, made a couple of threes. So overall impressive games. And yeah, I think, I'm going to do a video on Daisha Nix of the G League Ignite team tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, let's look at some of the games that happened over the weekend, since I didn't do one of these videos so far this week. So I haven't really kind of talked about what's been going on in the NBA since I believe last Friday. So some of the big games that happened over the weekend, you had the Pacers-Hawks in a close one. Pacers won by 12. I think it was a decent game. Nets-Warriors in the return of KD to Golden State. Ended up having, a decent game. Did get injured, so he hasn't played the last few games, but the Nets won pretty comfortably, 134 to 117 over there. Knicks beat the Rockets pretty comfortably won by 22 as they continue their surprising season. And the Jazz ended up beating the Heat 112 to 94. That was a game I had circled for the Heat because they had finally started to string together some wins. I know they beat the Knicks 2 times last week, and then, it looked like they beat the Rockets as well. So it looked like they were finally starting to turn the corner, and I thought the Jazz would be a really good test to see just how good they were and if they had really kind of gotten over that hump. But they lost, by, 18 points. So not very close. And, they still have a lot of things to work on. It's been obviously an up and down and frustrating year to be a Heat player, coach, or fan. They've had to deal with a lot of injuries. And I was talking about Osiris, who's been on the show before, but just trying to pinpoint like what's really going on with that team. And I broke down some of the stats and just went into it, and there's nothing really crazy, right? Because they are defending at a similar rate, they're getting to the free throw line at a similar rate, they're shooting at a similar clip, they're shooting pretty much identical stats from 3-point in terms of just attempts and makes, and their assists were similar. So it wasn't anything like from the numbers that you can really just look at and be like, all right, that's the reason why they're losing. Except one number did kind of stand out, and it was the turnovers. They do average, I think, 3 more turnovers a game, and that's leading to them scoring, I think, 6 less points per game this year. I think they were at 112 last year, and they're at 106 points per game this year. And some of that has to do with the point guard change, right? Because they started the year with Dragic coming off the bench, and I know he's missed time since, but they also had Tyler Hero trying to fill in and play that point guard role. And I know the Miami Heat as an organization and a lot of the fans believe that Tyler Hero can be a Devin Booker type player, a guy who's obviously a score first guy, but can distribute a little bit. And they saw him really, I think especially the way he played in the playoffs, and they thought that he might be able to take the next step. He's definitely improved, and he's still a very solid player, but I don't think he's there yet. And I've said this numerous times on this podcast, in videos. Goran Dragic might be the most important player on that team, and he's not the best player, but he's the most important. And I think what he provides for that team is irreplaceable. It's something that not many people, if any, on that team can do. And it really enables guys like Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero to do what they're best at, which is go out, shoot, focus on scoring. And, granted, Jimmy and Bam and Iguodala are all solid playmakers, but Goran Dragic does so in a way that creates more pressure on the other team, and that's by just being able to get into the paint whenever he wants. Dragic, ever since he's come into the league, has been both crafty and quick, and just always knows how to get into the lane, and is a good passer once he gets into the paint, whether it's out of double teams or just drive and kick. And they just miss that. They really do. And whether it's been his limited playing time from injuries or just his role on the bench to start the season, I think they just do miss that a lot. And people have pointed at, right, they lost Jay Crowder, and I know he's not a guy that in a vacuum is the most skilled player, but he's a guy that did provide them solid minutes last year in Miami, solid defense, some shooting. It is unfortunate because look, they have just missed a lot of games as well in terms of like injuries and COVID protocol. Like Jimmy missed a lot of time. We talked about Dragic and Hero as well. So I don't want to say they're just a bad team now, but they definitely have a lot of things to work on. I'm also not calling last year a fluke because I do think that this team has a lot of solid pieces and that they do a lot of things well. And, like I said, the shooting and the defensive numbers are still there. And some of these games that they are losing are pretty close. So it's not like, they're just getting blown out and they just look awful. But it is weird that, a lot of their struggles are on offense, and they do have some lulls. Even in games they win where they just go stretches without scoring and getting off great looks. I think they just have to keep playing together, stick to the plan, try to get some of that magic from last year. I will say one thing. While I don't think last year as a whole was a fluke, I think some of that playoff magic did have to do with the bubble. Now, just talking about this real quick, I think some teams benefited from the bubble and some teams didn't, and there's a bunch of varying factors, right? But I think Miami was a team that really thrived off of that, only focus on basketball, keep all the noise out, and just really lock in and be together as a team kind of atmosphere. And, we'll see if they can kind of recapture that. But, I also want to talk about the whole situation in the NBA right now. Before we get into some of the other games, just going off on a little bit of a tangent, I remember watching the Nuggets-Lakers game, which we'll talk about later. Richard Jefferson had spoken about how the situation right now, the current state of the NBA with all the safety protocols and just not being able to always see your family and travel as much and just the stricter schedule, is actually harder for some people than the bubble was, because this is an even longer time period where you're under very strict restrictions, right? And he had talked about how he heard that there are people within the Denver organization who believe that this is one of the things that's leading to Jamal Murray playing not as well as they thought he could, not as well as he did in the bubble. And granted, he's still having a solid season. He's struggled at times. And I just wanted to talk on that a bit because I do feel like we understand this is a irregular season. And a lot of people point to the fans, but I don't think people necessarily always shed a light on the fact that, right, a lot of these guys are no longer allowed to, even whether it's before game nights or after games, go out with teammates and maybe get a bite to eat, go get some drinks, just hang out, maybe see friends that are in the city they're playing in, and just, go out and do stuff, right? And whatever profession you're in, you're always going to want to have time spent away from that and just being able to relax and, just take your mind off of things, right? And it's no different in the NBA, where it's a very competitive league, competitive profession. You always have to be at your best or try to be or close to it. And you are now seeing, I think, some of the effects that aren't being talked about, but players are going to struggle at times with just this kind of mentality of just having to always feel like you're locked down and not feeling like you're always able to do things outside of the sport where you're able to just kind of, unwind and just relax. Now, some people may look at that as, all right, like, look, you're getting paid millions to play basketball, just, shut up and be happy. And it's not that easy, right? I appreciate guys like DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love who've come out and spoken about mental health, and, they always talk about how that's kind of the response they often get, but it's not about how much money you make or what job you have. Like, if you are dealing with anxiety or depression or things of that nature, it's not something that you can just be like, oh, whatever, man, I should be happy. I'm making a lot of money, right? Like, it's something you have to battle with and deal with, and times like the one we're living in today can make it more difficult to deal with. I will say that there are players who are better equipped to deal with this. I remember guys like Damian Lillard talking about how, he's always been kind of that guy who just goes home and relaxes, doesn't do a lot of things outside of basketball, and, so that he kind of has learned how to deal with it. And I'm sure there are other players in the league who are just basketball junkies and who aren't dealing with other things, who can just be like, whatever, man, I'm just playing basketball. I play basketball. I, go home. I watch basketball. I go to sleep. I wake up the next day, go to practice, come back home, watch more basketball, get ready for games. Like, I know there are guys in the league who are used to that and who are fine and maybe even, do better in those situations and don't have the other, whether it's distractions or just whatever, right? But I did want to talk about that because I do feel like we as fans and just people covering the game sometimes don't fully shed a light on the whole spectrum of what is going on in the NBA today. And I do think it's important to treat these players, because whether it's fantasy basketball or just watching these basketball games as fans or someone who covers the game or someone even just like a player trying to watch these games, sometimes it's very easy to just look at them as players and not people, right? And it's very easy to criticize them and talk about their games and how much money they're getting paid and all that. But at the end of the day, like, they're going through the same things we are, right? And granted, again, they're getting paid a lot of money. There's a lot more to it than just basketball money. So I do want to shed some light on that, especially on the heels of some of the stuff that Draymond Green talked about, which I'm sure I'll get into later on in the episode as well. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, so I went on a little bit of a tangent there, but I definitely do want to talk about, I want this to be a space where we talk about everything basketball, not just breaking down plays and talking about what's going on in the NBA on the court, but also just, all things, right? And I'm someone who was trying out to play overseas, and I've said that multiple times, but I've tried out multiple times overseas, and I've kind of gone through the grind of trying to be a professional athlete. So I just wanted to have, come at this from a different angle of not just being a fan or someone who looks at the game analytically, but kind of being in that space of being, somewhat a former athlete myself, and just trying to take people through, different aspects and different views of the game and everything that comes with being an NBA player. Not that I've been an NBA player, but I mean, you get what I'm trying to say. So on Sunday we had a few more games. Celtics lost to the Wizards, which I know, like, I have multiple Celtics fans and they weren't happy about that loss. They've had a couple bad losses recently. They lost to the Pistons last week as well. Look, that was a game where Kemba actually played well, right? And Jason Tatum just laid an egg. Had 6 points, 4 assists, and 8 rebounds. Kemba gave them 25. Jaylen Brown gave them 25. Jaylen Brown seems like the more consistent player, and I know there are games when Jason Tatum might score like 30, but he shoots like 40%, 38%. Jaylen Brown seems like the rock on that team, and I know Tatum probably still has his higher highs, and he's probably 1A on that team. But Jaylen Brown, man, I'm very impressed with him. I was a bit confused when they drafted him, but man, he's showing that the talent and the potential is there. What he can do on both sides of the ball is impressive, and I'm just always excited when he gets more opportunities, because I feel like the last couple of years he showed the talent and the potential, but he was a lot of times just kind of relegated to being, all right, Jaylen, you go spot up, shoot, spot up in the corner. You'll get your shots when you can. Maybe hustle on defense. We'll get you some fast break layups. We'll get you some backdoor cuts. But this year with Kemba being down to start the year and also struggling, and Gordon Hayward out, he's kind of just been, able to fully unleash his potential, and really happy about that. But yeah, pretty bad loss for Boston. I guess good win for Washington. I mean, they're still 7-17. With every loss, there's just more articles and pictures and videos and interviews about how Bradley Beal looks unhappy but won't ask for a trade, and then how inefficient and bad Russell Westbrook plays at times. And that's kind of, I'm like, until the Wizards go on some kind of miraculous 10-game win streak, or at least inch closer to 500 and the playoff race, that's going to be the norm for the Wizards. But I mean, I guess, a nice win for them. What else you had on Sunday? You had the Bucks Thunder game was ridiculous, because the Thunder, at first it was a blowout. The Bucks cut it close, and then they gave up 20 to Al Horford And I can't really talk because the Knicks gave up like 20 to Al Horford earlier in the season too. But Justin Jackson with 22 and hit the dagger. And man, that just, and they lost, and Darius Bazley had 18. Who else? Like Kendrick Williams with 10. But they lost to the Thunder without SGA. Right? Even with SGA, that's a game where the Bucks are just heavily favored. They have probably the 3 best players. I mean, I guess Jrue Holiday wasn't playing, but even then, they have the 2 best players on the court by far. Chris Middleton and Giannis. You could take either of them away from this game, and the Bucks should still win because of just the talent they have on that team. And they like the Bucks got 24 from Giannis, 23 from Chris. They got 14 from Bryn Forbes. They got 17 from DiVincenzo, 21 from Portis, and then it's nobody else scored. Right? DJ Augustine's been very disappointing for them this season. Brook Lopez has been looking older. He's had some solid games, but I mean the defense overall for this team just isn't where it needs to be. And I know Drew's out, but even before Drew came, like the last couple of seasons, Milwaukee had always been a very solid defensive team. That's kind of what Budenholzer has always prided himself on, right? And they just cannot defend this year. Like, they're not miserable defensively. Like, they're not Washington or the Nets, but man, like they just cannot. They're not the defensive team they used to be. And I think a lot of that does stem from Brook. He is averaging less blocks. I think his block rate is down, and he's someone that was always kind of an anchor for that defense. I mean, he's still important for that team just because of the shooting he gives them at his size, and he kind of spreads the floor, opens it up for a guy like Giannis to drive in. But I think him and his ability to defend the rim and just bigs in general has gone down, which has hurt them a bit. And, I mean, you saw what Jokic did to them. You saw what even Al Horford did to them. So it's kind of been an eye-opener. And on the perimeter, I mean, they should still be a decent team, right? Like, defensively, you have Giannis, Chris Middleton, and Drew. Osiris did make a good point, though, that a lot of the people that they had to replace, the depth they lost in the Drew Holiday trade and just during the offseason, they filled it with smaller guards. So now you're asking Pat Connaughton, Bryn Forbes, and DJ Augustine to try to defend guys who are stronger, bigger, and more athletic, and that's, I think, a good point. I do think that's something that they struggle with. I'm actually surprised Torrey Craig doesn't get more minutes. I know he doesn't provide them with the same amount of offense that Portis and Forbes and DiVincenzo does. That being said, he only played 13 minutes, and if you're going to run, Connaughton out there and he's giving you 7 points, and you're running DJ Augustine who's giving you 22 minutes of 1-point basketball, like you're not really losing much. Those guys combined for 45 minutes, 7 points or 8 points, 8 assists, and 7 rebounds. Torrey Craig's obviously not going to give you that many assists, but he'll give you rebounds and he'll give you points. I feel like he deserves more playing time. And Torrey Craig's by no means a great player, but I feel like he had solid moments in Denver, and he's someone that I feel like could slot in and give them more minutes, especially on the defensive end. But yeah, I mean, I do think he doesn't really solve the perimeter defense problem, I guess, but maybe that is something they can address in the trade deadline. Now, someone that fits their team very well in terms of just perimeter defender, especially coming off the bench, Elfrid Payton. I know he's not a great shooter, but you already have shooters. You don't need any more offense. I'm pretty sure their offense is fine. If they're looking for perimeter defense, especially coming off the bench with some size, which they struggle with, Elfrid Payton, you give us a second-round pick, man, the Knicks will give you. I'll get on the phone right now. You guys can make that deal happen right now. But yeah, big win for OKC as they kind of try to hover around, playoff contention. Pretty bad loss for Milwaukee, again, considering what they're trying to do. But yeah, I mean, it's been pretty disappointing to see because Milwaukee, I know they added a big piece in Jrue Holiday, but I thought he fit in pretty seamlessly, and offensively it's been fine for the most part, but they just haven't. I thought Milwaukee would still be really good in the East, and they're not bad by any means, but the consistency, it just isn't there, man. And maybe, again, this is one of those teams that are kind of struggling with kind of what's going on in the NBA these days. But yeah, so there was that. And then the Nuggets-Lakers game, which was a pretty big, hyped-up matchup. But then AD went down, and then the Lakers kind of looked deflated. And, it is what it is. Denver played pretty well, I guess. For the Lakers, they just need to get healthy, right? The regular season doesn't really mean much to them. Obviously, they want to finish with the best record as possible and secure as many home court advantage series as possible. But at the end of the day, man, it's all about just having LeBron and AD healthy. And, they do have a decent amount of depth this year, so I think they'll be fine. without AD for the regular season, just running guys like Harrell out there, and he gives them solid minutes. He's definitely looked a bit better defensively this year than he has in the past. He's by no means a stopper or a defensive anchor, but he's trying, putting out his solid minutes on defense. So yeah, I think they'll be fine. LeBron played a lot of minutes last week too, and he looked tired at times. I know the Lakers got off to some really bad first quarter starts, and I think that is something they still need to focus on and get better at. It is, maybe some of that. I don't want to call it a repeat hangover or championship hangover, because it's weird that it's coming this late into the season. I understand if it was coming the first 10 games, it's coming now. But, maybe you come out first 10, 20 games hyped, motivated to get that repeat, and then kind of the dog days of the NBA starts where it's almost All-Star break, but it's not. Teams are getting a little bit tired. So maybe they're just going through a bit of a lull. I'm not worried about them. I don't think anyone should be. I know it's not an Achilles injury per se. I think it's a calf strain. But even then, anything in that area, you just want to be careful with, especially if it's a muscle. And they just need to give him time. I think it was like 2 weeks they said, but screw it, man. Just give him 3, 4. I know he's not gonna want to sit out more time than he needs to, but just really make sure that it's 110%, right? Because you just want to make sure. Because if he goes down, fingers crossed, I'm not hoping it does, or I'm not saying it will, but you don't want to see that happen for the NBA or the Lakers. So we're going to Monday this week. Some of the games that have happened the last 2 days. Nets won against the Kings without KD. That was big. They continue to score a lot. Kyrie and James Harden put on a show, and they continue to give up a lot. 125 to the Kings, and I mean that's going to be a recurring theme. That's not going to change. They did pick up Andre Roberson, who should help with their perimeter defense a little bit. I don't know how healthy he is. I know he actually finally came back last season, so good for him. But yeah, I don't know what kind of shape he's in, and if he's ready to play, how many minutes he's ready to play, and if he can be anywhere close to the defender he once was. Because when he was fully healthy, while he was a liability shooting the ball, right, that problem doesn't even matter with the Nets because of their full offensive repertoire, but he was an elite defender for OKC. I mean, he locked a lot of guys up. He had elite, athleticism, not athleticism, but elite wingspan, had above average athleticism, just tried really hard, and he was a very good defender. So, it could be a big pickup for him, for the Nets. I know they've had rumors of Andre Drummond swirling around. Drummond doesn't necessarily really stop their interior defense problem because he's not an elite defender. He would be an upgrade over DeAndre Jordan for sure. But the one thing he does really well, better than almost everyone in the NBA, is rebounding. And we talked about on this channel plenty of times before how a lot of the Nets' struggles also come from rebounding. And it's not just the defense interior wise, it's rebounding, because a lot of times even if they get a stop, they give up rebounds and it leads to an open three, a putback, or free throw. So that is somewhere he will help. So it'll be interesting to see. And I know Drummond's gotten a lot of slander and just hate and disrespect over the last few weeks, and Draymond was really vocal about how he thought about that. So if you guys haven't seen it, I'm sure most of you guys have, but Draymond pretty much went and said that it's unfair that there's a double standard in the NBA and just people covering the NBA, because if a player asks for a trade, they're often deemed as not professional and not loyal and backstabbing, and they get booed, and a lot of people, just disrespect their choice and, judge them, right? But when a team decides to trade a player, or, they have a situation like on the Clippers when Steve Ballmer said Blake wasn't going to get traded and then traded him almost immediately after, or a situation where now in Cleveland, Drummond was ready to play and then they just make him go back, change into street clothes, and then say, we're not going to play you because we're going to trade you. Like actively going to trade you. Not even looking for, or possibly, they're just looking to trade him. And, if a player doesn't like that or voices his frustration with that, a lot, they get deemed unprofessional as well. So Draymond Green was talking about kind of the double standard in the NBA where players are held to a way higher standard and are judged on a different scale and in a different way than teams and owners are. And he's just asking for the NBA to protect its players, for there to be a more fair way of just a more balanced judgment of the way these narratives are written out, and I agree with them. You know, I know that people are saying, or some people, I don't know if they are, but I know some people could make the argument that, look, the players are getting paid, it's a business and whatever, and I get that. Like, if it's just all things like equal, if it's just a normal trade, it is what it is. If player X, right, gets traded, like if Drummond just happened to get traded and there wasn't any weird comment or statement and then making, Drummond sit on the bench, I think it'd be fine. But also, just like that, on top of the fact that like players can't ask out, is a bit weird, and it is unfair at times. Now, players asking for trades is also a slippery slope, because I'm all for player empowerment. I think it's good to have players be able to voice their opinions. I think it's good for players to be more so than before able to control their fate and their career and their legacy, because a lot of their livelihood, what they're remembered for, and their just name, right, is based off of what they do in their career. And that can be heavily determined by what team you play for, where you play. And again, we talked about the lifestyle of the NBA and how grueling it can be. You want to be able to choose where you're experiencing all that, right? So I don't mind players having the power and all that. I do think that there are times when players, not often, but there are times when players sometimes are unprofessional in the way they do it, or maybe not unprofessional, but sometimes just do so in an untimely manner. But, I think that it is what it is, right? We're now in an age where players have more voice and strength, and a lot of that is because of what the Players Association were able to bargain for, and you now have just way more strength from players since free agency, and even just a lot of giving players some opinions when it comes to team decision making, and just more power and a lot of those things. But yeah, I mean, I do agree with Draymond. I do think it's unfair, the double standard that is set. I think it goes both ways, because I do think there are times when players ask for too much or do so in a weird situation. But I'm almost never in a situation where I feel bad for a team, because again, as long as teams are able to just trade players whenever or cut players whenever and do all that, a player can just, I think, has the freedom to, ask out. And because even if a player asks out, like, a team doesn't have to trade him if they're under contract, right? They might be pressured to, right? And you might be looking at a situation where they might be losing value by keeping the player or whatever, or you might just be losing, time because you're just wasting time with an unhappy player. But I'm not going to feel bad for a team, again, as long as, they're able to just do whatever they want with a player, treat them like assets, but a player can't voice their opinion and they're deemed unhappy or unprofessional. I think that's BS. And Draymond, whatever you want to say about him on the court, he's always been very real, been very vocal about the betterment of the players and the treatment of the players. And, I'm all for that. I respect Draymond for the guy he is. And I think the NBA should be appreciative of a guy like that, who doesn't wait for the Players Association meetings or just, closed door meetings, and really is vocal to the public about situations and just stuff like this to raise awareness and get the fans and analysts talking. Because again, I do think it's important, because I think, going back to the Steve Ballmer Blake Griffin saga, I saw on Twitter yesterday, I know Sarah's pointed this out, there was a post that said, or I think Stephen A. Smith said this actually, which was just weird, it was astonishing, but like, I think Stephen A. said for the Clippers to trade for Blake again, Blake needs to apologize. And if this is over Blake not shaking hands with Steve Ballmer the first time that the Clippers were playing, I think in Detroit, or maybe it was Detroit playing in LA, that's bogus, man. That's BS. Because look, Steve Ballmer, again, he said he wasn't going to trade Blake and then almost immediately traded him. And if you're a star, or just really any player in the NBA or any league, all you're asking for is honesty and clarity, and just being able to know what's going on. Like, I think if Blake got traded by Steve Ballmer and the Clippers, no problem with that. You have the right to, right? That's part of the contract. You can trade him to whatever team in the National Basketball Association you so please. But to say to the media that you weren't gonna, and then to do it, like, and it's not like he wasn't planning on doing it and then he got an offer he couldn't refuse. Like, it's not like the offer was crazy. So, like, I don't know. That seemed just like a really weird situation where, like, again, he traded him. It is what it is. Blake, then you can call him petty, but I mean, it is what it is, right? Like, your star that put all your blood, sweat, and tears in that organization. The owner pretty much lied to your face and then just traded you. You don't have to give a handshake. I really don't think you do. You know, could he have? Yeah, of course. But I can see where he's coming from, and if I was in his position, I might not have either. But to say Blake needs to apologize, this goes back on the double standard. It's just unnecessary. I don't get it. Like, I think Steve Ballmer could apologize, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Very weird situation there. So, we went over the Nets Kings game. We went over so the Heat Clippers won in a game where they had pretty much no one. The Heat continue to struggle, right? And Jimmy Butler had a 30, 10, and 10 triple double. They scored 118. So their offense was actually decent this game. Tyler Hero scored 27. Bam scored 27. But the rest of their team gave them nothing, right? Kelly Olynyk gave them 2. Kendrick Nunn gave them 6. Iguodala gave them 2. Precious gave them 8. Max Strus gave them 3. Mo Harkless gave them 0 in 13 minutes. Goran Dragic still obviously out. But the Clippers, man. The Clippers won with Marcus Morris scoring 32. Zubac scoring 22. Lou Williams scoring 18, Terrence Mann scoring 15, and Amir Coffey scoring 15. And look, they didn't have PG or Kawhi, and this is, I mean, it's just mind-boggling, man. How do you lose to that? If you're Miami, I get you're having some injuries and you're struggling, but this is another game where you have probably the 3 best players on the court between Jimmy, Bam, and Tyler. This is as bad as Milwaukee losing to OKC. I don't understand, man. Some of these losses are crazy. But again, have to take into consideration everything going on in the NBA, and there are things that maybe we don't know about. But pretty bad loss for them. Celtics beating the Nuggets 99-112. Pretty big game for Boston to again just come back after a tough loss and to really just kind of bring it all together. The Nuggets continue to struggle. This game, it wasn't even Jamal Murray, who's been kind of up and down as we talked about. Jokic doing his Jokic thing, dropping 43. Also had 6 rebounds and 5 assists. Jamal Murray with 25, 6 and 6. But the rest of the team just couldn't. It looked like they didn't want to play. They didn't show up. I don't know. Maybe they were still sleeping. Michael Porter Jr., who's been super, super, super disappointing ever since he missed time with the COVID protocol situation. 0 points in 24 minutes. Right. You guys, everyone who's listening to this, all of us, we scored the same amount of points as MPJ did in an NBA game last night. It was embarrassing to watch. Super disappointing. He hasn't really taken that next step, and it looked like he was on the way to taking that step that the Nuggets wanted him to when the season started. But ever since, again, that break he had to go through, he's been horrendous. Very inconsistent. And that's on top of the still bad defense he plays. And I know Mike Malone's been wanting better defense from him, and he's shown better effort at times, but it's still inconsistent, and his shot selection is still not great. So pretty disappointing season from MPJ, especially as of late. But Boston finally came through and finally had a game where Kemba, Jason Tatum, and Jaylen Brown played relatively well. Again, Jaylen Brown was the guy with 27, Tatum had 21, and Kemba played 17, so all right. But it was mostly, I guess, a combination of Boston defense, which always been pretty solid, but also along with Denver's just horrendous offense outside of their 2 guys who actually showed up to the game. Other than that, you had the Nets Suns playing in a very close game. The Nets able to eke that one out without Kyrie or Kevin Durant. James Harden kind of putting on a show, reminding people that he's still really good, capable of carrying a team when needed. 38, 11, and 7 from him. And he's kind of just been the de facto point guard. I know Kyrie talked about saying, hey, James Harden's the point guard. He's going to play shooting guard. And I think that's the best way for that team to work. James Harden's always been a great passer, a guy with good court vision and just the ability to make every kind of pass, whether it's pocket pass, bounce pass, kick out pass. And he's been really good at just getting guys involved. He's been a willing passer once he got into the Nets, and it's not always just dribble, ISO, and then pass at the last moment. And, he's looked really good in that role. He's had some high assist games. I think had a game of like 15, 14, 13 assists, stuff like that. And he had 11 last night, but to go on with the 38 points and showcasing and showing that, again, when the team needs him, he's still a very, very good scorer. And, they had 22 from Joe Harris, and Joe Harris has, I think, gotten even better with James just because, you add another guy who's always been good at kicking out and just getting guys shots. And Joe Harris is probably the best shooter that James Harden's played with. And even though he's played with some solid ones, right? You got a guy like Joe Harris who won the 3-point competition, very good shooter. So that duo has been good. Tyler Johnson, whose career looked dead, but actually looked pretty good in the bubble last season, and it's given the Nets solid minutes when needed. This year, Jeff Green, Uncle Jeff, man, Uncle Jeff, he's always ready, and he's had some really solid games for the Nets. He's a guy that, tries on defense and can shoot the three a little bit, can still get up and dunk when he needs to. Does a little bit of everything. He's a very solid piece for that team, very good pickup. You had, I think, 13 from Shamet, and I know he struggled to start the season, so good to see him bouncing back. So, yeah, good win for Brooklyn. Phoenix, probably a game they wanted. You're at home. They're missing KD and Kyrie. It's a winnable game. But still, 29 from Chris Paul. Chris Paul's been on a tear. He's always just winning, man. And I know they lost this game, but he just goes to a team and they just win. And he's been really good for this team, especially as of late. He's up to scoring recently. Devin Booker with his 22, and he's actually the one with 7 assists as well this game. Chris Paul had 7 of his own. And Booker's scoring has taken a little bit of a hit, but I think the Suns obviously are just playing better basketball overall. Mikal Bridges only had 10, so maybe they could have gotten more from there, but Crowder had 15. And we talked about Crowder. Miami's probably missing him right about now. 16 and 9 from Ayton. Cameron Johnson, shooter, he chipped in 7. Cameron Payne with 9 off the bench. Phoenix probably missing another piece to be a serious contender, but Chris Paul just, man, point God, still just ageless, man. He's just, I know everyone talks about LeBron and just kind of how impressive he's been after playing for 39 years and just, his how many ever years he's been in the NBA and kind of just continues to play really well. But Chris Paul's another guy, and I know Chris Paul's a little bit different because he doesn't play with the same force or doesn't have the athletic, limitless abilities. But still, Chris Paul to be able to do what he's been doing at a shorter height and just continuing to put up numbers and win, very impressive. So wanted to shout out Chris Paul as well. Kind of does it for the games again over the weekend and so far this week. I know this was a bit longer of a video, and then for podcast, we haven't done one around this length for a while, but there's just a lot to talk about. So we talked about the stuff going on outside the NBA in terms of just off-court stuff, some of the things that players might be dealing with, and then as well as the whole double standard situation with Draymond Green. We talked about some of the struggles with Miami and Milwaukee. Yeah, these are all things I wanted to talk about. Again, I do want to stress some of the things that I've thought about wanting to talk about. It was not always on the court stuff, not just straight analysis or stats or breaking down plays, teams. Wanted to just have this be a space where we can talk about all things basketball, right? And whether it's just off-court stuff, whether it's fights or drama, storylines, and that includes things like mental health and just storylines and things like the double standard thing. So a little bit different of an episode, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment if you're watching this on YouTube. We are almost at 200 subscribers. It took a while to get to 100, but from 100 to 200 has been a lot quicker. We're really just trying to ramp it up. I know we've said that a lot, but the beginning of 2021 has been really good, so I appreciate everyone for the support. If you're watching or if you're listening to this, I guess on Apple Podcast or Spotify, thank you. Stay tuned. Do follow and just subscribe. Leave us a comment if you can, and we're gonna come out. Usually we have a podcast a week. Sometimes they're shorter, sometimes they're longer. The longer ones are usually before like playoffs and before drafts and after drafts, where we have guests sometimes, and we're just able to talk about more things and just have a longer conversation. Do follow us on our social media. We're following people back. On Twitter, it is Keep It Hoop Blog, and on Instagram, it is keep_it_blog or keep_it_hoop, right? So yeah, follow us there. Again, we're always posting about updates on our videos, podcasts, articles, and then just sharing our opinions on what's going on in the NBA. So yeah, just stay tuned for more. We got more stuff coming up. Do really appreciate everyone for the continuous support. And again, tomorrow will be another G League video. Daisha Nix, who's been really impressive. And I think he's surprised me with some of his play. I didn't know much about him going into the G League season, but I think he's someone who's upped his stock by going to the G League. Again, the G League Ignite thing, I love what they've done, and I hope this is something that stays for a long time, because I think it's a great outlet to have and just an alternative option to college and playing abroad. But yeah, thanks again for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow for a video, so stay tuned for that. Thanks.